Chapter 21 of Frank Merriwell's Trust by Burt L. Standish. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 21. Frank and Inza. All night Frank dreamed of Inza. In the morning he received a brief message from her. Her father had been taken ill again, and was convinced that he could not withstand the attack. He was pleading to see Fardale again before he died, and Inza and her brother had resolved to take him back there if he could endure the journey. She could not leave him, but would not Frank and Dick come to her, that she might thank them for having saved her brother? Walter wanted to see them also. Dick at once declined to go, but told Frank that he must go. At first Merry urged Starbright to come along, but the big fellow shook his head, saying,
"No, Frank, it would be folly for me to go there. Much better for me to stay away. You must understand that I must keep away from her."
It was useless to urge him to go, so Frank gave it up. They saw Diamond off first. As Jack made an early start, he was in a royal good humour.
"You must come across for the occasion when it comes off, Mary."
He smiled, speaking of his marriage to Juliet Reynolds.
"You know you are to be the best man."
"I can't promise absolutely, old fellow,"
said Frank.
"but I'll come if I can. We can't be sure of the future."
"All I know is that I owe everything to you, for I might have blown in my last dollar gambling if you had not pulled me up with a round turn. Had I done so, my conscience would not have permitted me to accept Juliet's invitation to come back. I should have regarded myself as entirely unworthy. Merriwell, I can never repay you for what you have done."
"You have already."
"How?"
"With your smiling face, your happiness, the change that has come over you, it's enough."
They shook hands like brothers and then parted. Many things were to happen before they met again. Frank and Starbright had intended returning to New Haven by an early train, but Dick decided to wait now that Merry was to call on Inza. Merriwell found Inza in a family hotel near the park. She had been waiting for him, and at first she did not seem to notice that Starbright had not accompanied him.
"I was afraid you could not come,"
she confessed, as she gave him her hand and looked into his eyes.
"and I have so much to thank you for."
"Don't thank me, Inza. You know I would do anything for you, anything in my power."
"Would you?"
"Haven't I proved it many times?"
Yes. And last night you were the one my mind turned to when I felt sure Walter was in trouble and danger. He says he owes his life to you. You must let him thank you. He is with Father now."
"It seems so strange that you have a brother. I can hardly realize it."
"Hush! It is not known here that he is my brother. He is supposed to be my cousin. You know it is dangerous for him to be in this country. He might be arrested."
"I'll take care not to let the cat out of the bag. I had thought him dead so long that I never dreamed he could be a bearded man like that. I remember him only as a slight, dark-eyed stripling at Fardale."
Fardale. The mention of that magic word seemed to give them both a thrill, bringing to them a rush of delightful memories. Her cheeks flushed and her bosom heaved, while a soft sigh escaped her lips. How beautiful she was! Frank had ever regarded her as the handsomest girl he knew, but at this moment, with the remembrance of those old sweet days stirring within her heart, she seemed far more lovely than ever before. He was seized by a sudden desire to clasp her to his heart at that moment and declare the passion which had been reawakened within his soul, but he realized that such a sudden action might baffle his purpose, and with a mighty effort he held himself in restraint.
"I have been thinking of those days in Fairdale,"
she said softly.
"Have you?"
"Yes."
"So have I."
She lifted her eyes, and the look she saw in his face surprised her not a little. It was the old look of admiration, more than admiration. The moonlight had revealed to her that look the night he kissed her over the gate in front of her home in Fardale. Then he might not have held himself in check, but she fell back a bit before him, and he fancied her movement was one of repulsion. Something told him that it would be a terrible blow if she were to repulse him now, and it was possible she still cared for Starbright, or thought she cared.
"Go slow, Frank Merriwell,"
something seemed to whisper in his ear.
"You have given this girl every reason to think you cared more for another. Now be careful not to make a break that may cause her to doubt your sincerity."
And so by his own good sense he was restrained.
"Why should you be thinking of Fairdale?"
she asked, her girlish curiosity aroused.
Why, I don't know exactly. Some talk brought it to my mind."
She was surprised to note that he, usually so direct and straightforward, seemed rather confused and faltered somewhat.
"Those were happy days,"
she murmured softly.
"In truth, they were,"
he exclaimed.
"We did not dream how happy at the time."
"Nor did we dream of the strange things to happen in the future. I often think, Frank, that I can never again be quite as happy as I was back there."
"I have thought the same, Hinza."
"Oh, but you have everything to make you happy."
"Have I?"
"To be sure."
He longed to tell her then that there was one thing he did not possess, one thing that would make him happier than all else. The words rose to his lips. Had he spoken them, a direct proposal must have followed. At that moment, however, one of the guests of the house looked into the parlour, which was sufficient to deter him for the time. Somehow this repression of his feelings simply seemed to make them more intense, as is usually the case with everyone. Now that he feared to speak out, he longed to do so most intensely. He inquired for Mr. Burrage.
"I am truly worried about him,"
Inza declared.
"These spells of illness are becoming more frequent, and he feels he may not live long. That is why he was seized by a sudden desire to see Fairdale again."
"Perhaps it will do him good to visit your old home. I hope so."
"I hope so too, Frank. If Father should die—"
She stopped with such an expression of pain on her face that all the sympathy and pity of his nature stirred.
"Don't worry, Inza. That will not happen for many years to come."
"We cannot be sure. I should be left alone in the world."
"Not alone for your brother?"
"Hush! He must go away again, must leave the country. If he were recognized and apprehended, the blow would be sure to completely undo Father."
Her trouble and distress affected Frank and compelled him to say,
"You know, Inza, that you may ever depend on me. If anything happens, I shall be ready to help and befriend you."
"I have no doubt of that, Frank. Somehow, I've been wishing you were going back to Fairdale with us, if only for a single day."
His heart leaped at the thought, to be in Fardale with Inza once more, to visit the dear old spots with her. She was watching his face, and she suddenly exclaimed,
"Why don't you come, Frank? Can't you? You can go along with us. Please come."
Her hand was on his arm, and they were alone again. He secured that hand and looked deep into her eyes.
"Do you really wish me to come?"
"Of course I do. It would be splendid. And I'm sure you could give Father strength and courage to bear up and withstand the journey."
A struggle was taking place within his heart, for he knew that already he had remained away from college far longer than he should. He had obtained permission to leave for a time, but surely it had been anticipated that he would return before this.
"Do come with us, Frank,"
she urged.
"If you wish, you may leave us as soon as we arrive there."
He could not resist such pleading.
"I'll do it, Inza,"
he exclaimed.
"I'll go back to Fardale with you."
Frank found Mr. Burrage sitting bolstered in an easy-chair, wrapped about with blankets and made easy with pillows. Walter Burrage was with the invalid. He advanced at once, his hand outstretched and greeted Merry.
"Mr. Merriwell,"
he said,
"I am glad you have given me this opportunity to thank you for saving my life."
Don't speak of that,
urged Frank.
I was glad to be of service, and...
You came just in time. The fire was gaining rapidly, and those chinks had left us perfectly helpless, bound hands and feet. I've been to the hospital to see the doctor, whom they tapped on the head, and they say there is no chance for him to recover. His skull is fractured. The police are looking for the Chinaman, though they are not informed of all that happened. The Chinese Secret Society has recovered that infernal little black stick, which I brought to this country to sell to Dr. Deneville, and I shall never lay eyes on it again. But for the fact that I knew the doctor would pay a large sum for it, I should never have ventured into the United States at this time. Even now, I'm afraid my concern with this affair may bring about my recognition."
My boy,
fluttered the invalid.
They have no right to harm you. I'm sure you never did anything wrong, and...
There, father,
came soothingly from the lips of Inza's bearded brother.
I did not mean to reawaken your fears. It's all right. I can do better in Australia than in this country, and...
But I am an old man, and I should have my only son near me. It is hard to be unjustly separated from him.
Frank has agreed to make the journey to Fairdale with us,
said Inza.
I invited him.
I'm glad he's going along,
murmured the sick man.
And so am I,
nodded Walter.
We'll have an opportunity to talk over the old days at the academy. It'll be good to have a boyhood friend to chat with. I've often thought of those days and wondered what had become of Frank Merriwell, who was the leader in every honest sport at the academy.
If I can stand it to travel so far,
came wearily from Mr. Burrage.
It was folly for me to leave the old home and wander over the world in search of health. The search has been in vain, and I'm going back to die.
To get well, you mean?
Put in Merry cheerfully.
The atmosphere of the old home will give you new life and courage.
Do you think so?
Eagerly asked Mr. Burrage.
Of course it will. Why shouldn't it? Your old friends will be glad to see you again.
That's true. I believe you are right. The thought of it buoys me up.
Inza gave Frank a grateful look and soon found an opportunity to whisper to him.
I knew you could do him good. You always have a way of putting new life and courage into anyone.
He smiled at her.
You should hear the wonderful things Inza has been telling me about you, Merriwell,
said Walter.
Why, if she has not been romancing, you are the most wonderful fellow in the whole world.
Not that,
declared Merry.
But you are a wonderful athlete, and your fame has spread over the country. Yale must be proud of you. But it was the only thing to expect from Frank Merriwell of Fardale. I remember that you were constantly at work building yourself up and trying to become physically perfect. Nor did you spend your whole time at this to the neglect of your studies, but you never wasted time. You were forever doing something.
That's the secret of success,
smiled Merry quietly.
A fellow who wastes his time wastes his chance of success. Prize fighters have muscular development, but usually little mental development. The perfect man seeks both by giving his body and his mind just the proper amount of work and rest.
By Jove,
cried Walter, his eyes flashing.
You should be a teacher of your theories, Merriwell. I believe you could do an immense amount of good in the world.
Yes,
murmured the sick man.
I believe so, too. If I had known what to do when I was young, if I had built my body up properly, I'd not be here today, a wretched, worn-out invalid. It was ignorance that brought me where I am.
Frank felt that Mr. Burrage spoke the simple truth. He was a man grown old and broken down before his time, a piece of machinery out of repair, and all because he had not in early life built himself up properly to withstand the strain that came upon him in later years. This is the great error made by thousands and hundreds of thousands. In their youth they fail to understand the need of building for themselves strong, sound, healthy bodies to help them fight to a successful finish the battles of life. As boys and girls they may feel exuberant, strong, and they fancy that they will grow to be what is right and proper. Then it is that they should be told that if they neglect developing themselves, they will grow up with their parents' physical imperfections plainly marked and pronouncedly apparent. The weak spots will remain weak. They may become weaker. The strong points will not keep the weak parts from giving out and breaking down when a heavy strain is brought upon them. And what good is a perfect, handsome engine with a broken piston shaft? The engine cannot run till it has a new shaft. Unfortunately, the human engine cannot be repaired thus easily. When a breakdown occurs, the result may mean that the engine stops forever.
Fardale did much for me,
declared Walter.
But I must confess that I was influenced greatly by your example, Merriwell. I know you did lots of good in that school, and now I have found that boys and young men all over this country are profiting by your example. Everywhere they are beginning to work regularly to make themselves stronger and handsomer and better. It's a great thing, Merriwell, to know that you are doing this for the youth of the land.
As of old, Frank was unable to keep the warm colour from mounting to his face.
I fear you are giving me altogether too much credit,
he protested.
Not if all reports are true. Inza tells me there are Frank Merriwell athletic clubs everywhere, the members of which are bound together by pledges that compel them to do each day a certain amount of work to make themselves physically perfect.
Why, the papers are full of it,
Inza declared.
Hardly a day passes that I do not read something about it.
You seem to have brought about a revolution in America, Merriwell,
smiled Walter.
Well,
said Mary,
it is high time such a revolution took place, for disaster graver than commercial depression and financial panic has begun to threaten us.
You mean?
Degeneration. It is a fact that Americans are great money makers, and the struggle for wealth has threatened to put an end to all efforts for health. Already the signs of such decay as has befallen other powerful nations in the past have begun to appear all over this broad land. Men are thin-legged, small-necked, narrow-chested, weak, bespectacled, dwarfed, underdeveloped, and yet they seem quite unaware of the fact that they are lacking in the very points that go to make up perfect manhood.
You're right,
nodded Walter.
Go on.
Our forefathers lived simpler and plainer lives, and therefore they were better developed, hardier, handsomer. Sometimes we hear that the span of human life has increased in the last decade, that men live longer today than formerly. This may be true, but it is because our medical skill is far greater, our homes are more comfortable, and we are less exposed to the things that destroy life. But take this generation and put it back into the conditions that existed 60 years ago, and our weaklings would go to the wall by thousands. The time has come when somebody must sound the warning note and bring the young men and the boys of the land to a realizing sense of the danger that threatens.
That is sound truth and common sense,
cried Walter.
And you, Frank Merriwell, are just the one to do the work. Why don't you take it up?
I have thought of it,
confessed Mary.
Oh, what a grand thing that would be,
cried Inza.
Grand indeed,
echoed her brother.
Think of devoting a life to the improvement and elevation of humanity. Why don't you do it, man? The boys of this country will listen to you when you speak, for they already recognize you as the representative and physically perfect young American. You can lecture.
That is first rate, but I have a plan of reaching far more boys and young men than by lecturing.
How?
Through a book.
Splendid!
Inza clapped her hands.
That's it!
She nodded.
You should do it, Frank. You should write a book that will tell the boys just what to do.
I think I shall as soon as I find time. Almost any boy may become a wonderful athlete if he knows how to go about it. And where is the boy who does not long to have a splendid, handsome body, who does not desire to be admired and recognized as a leader among his fellows? If the ordinary boy knew just how to go about it, he could accomplish this. If I ever write that book, I'm going to tell the boys just how to do it.
Such a book would have been worth millions to me in my younger days,
earnestly declared the invalid.
Had I possessed it, I'd not be here now, a broken-down man.
It was a sad thing to hear him utter those words, and Frank realised their absolute truthfulness. Bernard Burrage had given out long before there was a necessity for such a thing, and now, even if he were to live some years, he must drag along in suffering and pain, punishment for the neglected opportunities of his youth. Had he built himself up properly years before, he might have remained robust and healthy to the end of his days, vigorous in his declining years. The conversation now turned to other matters, and when Mary left, it was with the promise that he would be on hand when they were ready to start for Fardale. So Starbright returned alone to Yale. End of chapter 21.